is a tiny bit of like ancient history. So I've been with Dataiku for about 5 years, and long before I had such a grandiose sounding title, I ran post sales for the West US. And I always joked back then, because we've sort of obviously, as like the company has grown, we've changed those around. But I always laughed because it was very clear that the people who had designed what our regions looked like all lived in New York, because if it didn't touch the Atlantic Ocean, it was west. And I'm glad that we're back to that. That it pretty much is just like now, it's just like there's things that touch the Atlantic Ocean, and then there's west. Close enough, right? So yes, awesome. So I thanks everybody for coming. So Chicago is home to me. I'm a transplant. I was actually also born in San Diego, so that's where I'm originally from. And for some odd reason, I've now spent like nearly 3 decades living in Chicago. So something's right or wrong with that, depending on where you live. What I want to talk about here today, we've all heard tons of talk in the last year, especially around this topic of AI. What is AI? What are we doing with it? Everybody is talking about it. Everybody is asking questions about it. I won't make the what's the old Supreme Court porn joke of like everybody's talking about it, but nobody knows what it is. But what is very true is that everybody right now is looking at how they're investing, right? We hear this conversation from the boards, from the C-suites, from everywhere. Everybody's asking, what's your Gen AI strategy? And we're getting, of course, our customers, our partners, the CDOs, the people running data science teams are coming to us and asking, again, we're being asked, how do you do this? How does this change for us? And there's a real risk right now that those strategies will just end up not fulfilling what you want to fulfill. So why is that? So we're kind of calling this the commodity AI treadmill or trap of everybody's coming and asking, what is your Gen AI strategy? What are you doing? This is a lot of new technology necessary to do this, both from the infrastructure and all the way up to the software layers, and then even into the training and that. And so if we think about this in sort of, a couple axes of one is, what am I spending? What is the spend that is going out here to invest in these technologies and the people and the training that's going to make this possible? And so if you think about what's going to happen over the next, let's call it 5 years, no matter what, is you're going to spend more money on new technology to be able to do this. And so is your competitors, or all of your competitors in your space. They're going to be spending this money. And it's pretty possible that 5 years from now, you've both all reaped a lot of value from these investments, right? These technologies absolutely do have real impact that can be captured in companies. But it's also very plausible that 5 years from now, both companies will have spent a lot of money and both companies will be doing better, but you spent a lot, but you haven't gotten anything for it relative to the market, right? Maybe you're doing better, great. But if your competitors are doing the same, then what have you actually gained, right? This is a very common trap, right? If we think about sort of like the move to internet 20, 30 years ago, like some people absolutely managed huge returns because they did it well. And a lot of people just spent money, right? So how do we actually get out of this trap and make better? So how do we think about changing that function in a way that we end up in a different place, or more specifically, you end up in a different place 5 years from now, where you're spending that money, sure, but the value is outpacing your competitors and actually being differentiated, right? That differentiated AI gap. You're still thinking about the same AI. You're still thinking about the same models. You're still thinking about that investment in the technology. The spend may be the same, but how do you actually get more value out of what you're spending in a way that's going to differentiate your results? So it's a great theory, but what does that actually look like? Where do we see that happening? There's a lot of different components to it, but the one where we see the biggest opportunity and the most available sort of return on that differentiation is really through the idea of AI agents, right? This is the piece that, as we look at the sort of explosion of interest in the LLM and generative AI space and the sort of transformer and foundation models is, yeah, they're cute when you're talking about ChatGPT. There's some fun things. I too also love to rewrite my emails via prose in the style of Tupac. However, it's not really something that is a business differentiator, unless you're, I guess maybe if I worked for like Warner Brothers or something, it could be, but so far I haven't found any business value out of that. But similarly, we've already been investing in data and analytics and data science and machine learning And for those of us who've been in this, in this industry, whatever, today it's the AI industry, but sort of call it the data industry at large, it sort of feels like the same conversation every 5 to 7.5 years, right? It's a new term. 15, 20 years ago is data mining was the big thing that everybody talked about. And 10, 12 years ago is all data science. And then 5 years ago is all machine learning. Today it's all AI. It's the same damn conversation every few years where people keep talking about, hey, companies have all this massive data, this information, but we're not getting value out of it. Now, here's this new technology, right? It's the same technology with a new name that this is gonna change the equation. And some companies actually do unlock that value, but it's, small pieces of the winners, right? It's not happening at scale. The thing that's really interesting about the advent of the LLMs is it really gives us an opportunity to cross what we've often seen as that sort of like last mile gap in these investments in our data and in our tools. Sure, we make our data better and we build some dashboards or we build, some interfaces that people can use. And for the people that put in enough investment into doing that, or the company that sort of built it right, those people are able to really glean value out of it. But that tends to be a small fraction of the people that are at your organization. Same thing as we started moving into the data science world, right? We're building these models that can help do lead scoring. They can help risk forecasting. They can have whatever. But understanding how to use that model effectively is actually a lot of work to be able to do. The example that I often give to that, and so for those of you who've heard me talk about this before, I apologize, but so I was a weather forecaster in the Air Force 20-something years ago. And that was a really interesting industry to watch. Meteorology has changed massively over the decades. And so the guys that sort of taught me to forecast had been forecasters in the 70s and 80s, where everything was manual. You literally hand drew the charts over a light table with a cigarette hanging out of your mouth, right? And by the time I was doing it in sort of the early 2000s, you're doing it yes, you still had to be able to do that hand drawing, and they made us learn all of that. But then also you're getting the weather models, right? These super sophisticated and very much in the spirit of now today machine learning and AI. In these models could literally spit out this is what the forecast looks like tomorrow, right? And so as a forecaster, I could have literally copied and pasted that sort of METAR code is what it's called, and put that in, and I would have been fired the next day, right? Because that's not a valid forecast. Yes, it's what the model is saying to me, but I also have 2 models, 3 models, 5 models, all giving different results. I've got my own knowledge of how do I look at the data, how do I look at, and so our job was not to just take the output of a model and swallow it whole. We had to understand what the models were, how do they work, what are their biases, when is which model in a better set, and that took years to teach us how to do that. And so as we think about rolling out data science, and this is the challenge, this gap, this last mile we've seen, is training somebody to use a new lead scoring model that we've done, or a new risk forecasting model or something like that. We don't have years to train these people to understand enough statistics, to understand enough of the data science to be able to use these. And this is where you see the potential for leveraging these AI agents, right? To be that interface at that last mile between the data assets we've built, the models that we've created, and the end user who has to be able to understand the data, ask questions of the data, understand the models, and work into it. There's things that we still need to educate people on, how to avoid hallucination, how to avoid, coming into, and we need to think about that more from the sort of UI and the developer side of things, right? Right now, we sort of ask an LLM a question and it gives you, what's the smartest 5-year-old you've ever talked to, because every answer it gives you is 100% certain. And it's an interesting sort of thing to think about from a development perspective is, if I asked, I go back 20 years ago to when I was at Forecaster, or 10 years ago working in finance, where I'd say, hey, Dave, what's the answer to this question? Dave says, oh, it's this. This is where you find it, da-da-da. Cool. I'm going to go and I'm going to do that. I'm going to pretty much assume that he knew what he was talking about. But if I say, hey, Dave, what's the answer to this? And he goes, well, it might be da-da-da. I'm probably not going to take that answer and run off to my boss and say, this is the answer, right? I'm going to think about it. I'm going to put my critical reasoning. I'm going to go and investigate it. When we interact with LLMs today, or these AI agents, every answer is like that first answer, right? So we don't get some of that same nuance that you get in spoken word versus text word. And we already know how hard it is to interpret emotions via text, just like texting our significant others, right? How often do you misread something that's actually written by a human, let alone things that are being written by robots? So There is still work that needs to go into how do we think about these and how do we use these, but building these out and being very careful about how you do it is how we're going to take all this good work that we've done and expose it better to those end users without saying, hey, you want to be a citizen data scientist? Cool, go learn Python, right? Nobody wants to learn Python to just be able to understand the output of the model that you built. Oh, you want to be able to understand how to use this lead scoring model? Let me show you my binning results, and here's how this all comes out, and here's all of the betas that we put on. What? I am a data scientist, and I still don't want to listen to that, right? Let alone those business users who are sitting out at the end. This is where these AI agents can come in to really help do that explanation for us. To give it a little bit more concrete example of what can this interaction begin to look like. So today, I talked about my, I guess not apocryphal, my old colleague Dave. This is what that sort of interaction looks like for him and his business stakeholders, or me and my stakeholders here at Dataiku. The business person, the leader, whatever, they ask a question. They ask that of their analyst, that's working for them on their team or in their team. And first, there's going to be a whole bunch of back and forth. Okay, are you asking this? Well, are you really asking this? Oh, you're asking about our P&L numbers. Well, are you asking about which of these 20 different types of revenue that we're talking about? Which one are you actually asking about? I don't know, revenue, right? That analyst maybe hopefully goes off and has access to the data. They know some SQL, they know some Python. They go and dig into it. They come up with an answer. They send that off. I like that we still have it there's only one bidirectional arrow because we all know that every single one of these steps is bidirectional, and you spend a lot of time going back and forth through this whole circle because we give that report to the person that asked for it, and half the time they forgot they asked the question because it took us so damn long to get them the answer that they don't even, and they're like, oh, what is? Oh yeah, thanks for that. That problem was solved weeks ago because I didn't have time to wait for you. Or you give it to them, they're like, this is wrong, go do it again. Right? So how do we improve that cycle? This is where these AI agents come into, where in between that analyst and that business stakeholder is a machine interface that allows that business stakeholder to ask questions directly of the system, of the data, in the same way that we sort of have talked about for a while, things like ThoughtSpot and some other technologies that were sort of supposed to be, how do you, in a native language way, interact with the data, but they were still very, very tricky, right? You really sort of had to know the specific field and everything. The AI agents, because of that natural language ability, allow that business user to interact with the data, interact with the models in a way that the response can come with the explanation. Oh, you're telling me that I'm forecasting a 10% drop in demand for this product line over the next quarter. Why? Right? These AI agents are built in a way to respond with these are the variables that are tracking into it. They can generate graphs on the fly to explain what's going on. These are the things that help somebody interact with that. Now, this is obviously not the agent working on its own. The platform that's happening behind the scenes, you have the data scientists, you have the analysts who are building the models, who are building the data, they're pushing all that in, and they're validating those responses, right? So rather than every question has to come to me as the analyst, I'm asking, questions at scale of the machine and the data, and the analysts, the data scientists, our technical people are spending their time maintaining the models themselves rather than answering all of the questions. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can see this happening in organizations, right? So, that business person could be asking a question where there's a fine-tuned API-based LLM that is the right agent to answer that question. Could be sensitive data that we don't want to be doing externally. So this is actually self-hosted and something that's sitting internally that we are managing and building and tweaking on our own because it's sensitive data, it's strategic, it's HR-based, it's something along those lines. It could be the actual developers using code assistants to help write their code using, again, small, cheaper LLM, right? These are expensive. We definitely need to think about how we manage the cost, but a bunch of different ways you can think about this. This can be built with access to your data, right? The biggest gap we sort of see in the general purpose LLMs right now is that lack of the sort of proprietary information that you have. It's great that it's been trained on all of the internet, and so if it's publicly available data, that's great, but applications of those just sort of via RAG is a good first step, but there's still a lot more that we need to figure out how to sort of improve that interaction and access to your own data. Build it with feedback, right? So this is how you start to find out which models are working, which are not. How do you tweak them? How do you tune them? You can actually build in the RLHF feedback loops to actually then automatically improve the agents and the models. We can use proprietary code libraries internally. Like this is where we can actually start to like bring in our own in-house, not just data, but like our own technical expertise. We can build the models, right? An LLM is great at explaining a model. An LLM isn't good at writing a forecasting model, right? That's not what it's done. But where you put it on top of some of that structured learning or supervised learning, there is the application of then sort of you build the good models, the LLMs sit on top of those. And so there's all these different aspects of that sort of this decision process where the agents can really be impactful in improving and speeding up these interactions. Now, every company has many domains where these can apply, right? So in this, we're talking about sort of like just the core business units in a pharmaceutical company, but I mean, all of you are from many different industries and can sort of think about, some of you, well, everybody's got HR, everybody's got finance. Some of these are obviously sort of like it's consistent across the board, but maybe sales and marketing is important, maybe R&D is important, maybe logistics is important, whatever, right? You have those sort of different areas that matter to you primarily as a business, but there are opportunities within any one of these categories for multiple AI agents. So if we look at a sales performance team, the agents could be an account expert agent that actually is hey, I just want to know about this account, right? So like Phil, our new CRO here needs to, before he hops into a conversation with somebody 20 minutes from now, be able to be like, what's going on with this account? Hey, tell me, agent. And now he knows. He doesn't actually want to know, but in theory, he could maybe want to know those things. We can have things that are going in and managing MEDDIC, right? How people look at what data is in there. We can have meeting summary agents that just capture, what happened in that meeting, explain it out, surface it up to your boss or whoever. Follow-ups assistants. I am the worst follow-upper in the world, as he is already shaking his head because he knows. But an agent that would be like, hey, you committed to do this thing in that call. Don't forget to go do that thing. Pipeline help. Like this is just a handful of those that would help manage, or more to the point, not necessarily me, but in any organization, tens, dozens, hundreds of thousands of salespeople, right, to do all these things. Now, how do we actually go about this process? I'm talking about agents that could be, there we were talking about, and just in that, like hundreds of possible agents, just in that sort of previous slide. There's really three ways you can make this happen. One, you can hire engineers and build all this yourselves, right? Software engineers, data engineers, AI and ML engineers, it's just sort of like build all this from scratch, which was what you had to do to date for the most part. Second, you can build these yourself, but build it with a platform, right? So that you're not actually sort of managing that whole infrastructure yourself to make these happen. And thirdly, you can buy them off the shelf, right? And there's a huge industry out there building on top of these LLMs, making an LLM for every possible use case that's out there to do it. So how do you decide what to do here? If you're talking about doing it at scale, there's two things that two options that don't really work. One is hiring enough people to do it yourself, right? If you are a tech company and you have thousands of engineers, go build those things yourself. And if you look at Facebook or Amazon or Google, that's essentially what they have done, but they have thousands of engineers, right? They are software companies, that's what they're doing. So that's really hard to do. It's really expensive. And even for them, that's hard, to be super fair, right? So this is not practical for most companies. On the other end of the spectrum, if you just go buy all of these things, this is that first graph we showed. Everybody can go buy it, right? So you have the same thing that every one of your competitors can have by just buying the same thing or just clicking yes on the I'd like Copilot sort of option, right? Like you need to be doing some of these yourself and building them and managing them, but not across the board, not across those sort of like that full solution space we were talking about. Look at the strategic functions. What matters to you as a business? I talk about those tech companies that are doing this. They're not doing it at scale in every part of their business. Amazon is doing it in the places where it matters. The customer interactions, the logistics management, pieces like that. Those are the pieces where they have built that out. If you look at Facebook, it's how do they drive that interactions, right? All those experiments that they do on what engages clicks, what does this, da-da-da. That's where they've focused that investment. They're not necessarily doing it in their logistics, right? Like does Facebook have logistics? I don't know, or Meta, whatever they are. Do they have logistics? I don't know. They don't care about that, but Amazon certainly does. Google's doing it on search and they're doing it on ad revenue and things like that, right? So you build these where it matters the most. The rest of them you can buy, right? That's okay. Copilot for like summarizing my email is great, right? Like that's not a strategic differentiator to me as a company. So I wouldn't go build an agent to do that, but I can certainly buy that. So this is where we think about how do you actually do that? Our view, of course, is that Dataiku is a platform that can help you do that. So I'm unbiased in this opinion that I have up here, but we really see that this is that strategic differentiator and the path to being able to really reap the value from your investments in AI.